The Castle of Eternal Dusk. The first glimpse of Castle Viramont came at twilight, when the mountains surrendered their sharp outlines to shadow, and the sky above them deepened into a bruised violet. The carriage that bore Adrienne Laurent along the winding Carpathian road slowed of its own accord, as if the horses sensed a boundary not marked on any map. Before him, rising from a black spur of stone, stood the castle, vast, vertical, and impossibly still. Its towers pierced the fading light like solemn fingers, and its narrow windows reflected the last embers of day without revealing what lay within. Mist coiled around its lower walls, obscuring the foundation so that the structure appeared less built than grown from the mountain itself. Adrian had come as a scholar, though not officially. His letters of introduction described him as a historian specializing in rare manuscripts and obscure lineages. The truth was more complicated. For several years he had traced references to a noble house that appeared throughout fragmented archives under different names, but always with the same heraldic mark, a silver crescent crossed by a thorned branch. The House of Viramont had not merely faded from history, it had receded deliberately, withdrawing from public record sometime in the late 18th century. And yet, recent transactions, purchases of land, rare books, shipments of antiquities, suggested that someone bearing the name still lived. The gates of Castle Viramont stood open when Adrian arrived, though no guard waited to receive him. The courtyard beyond was vast and silent, paved in dark stone that reflected the sky like a dull mirror. Statues lined the inner walls, knights, saints, hooded figures whose faces had eroded into ambiguity. Above, balconies and arched windows layered upon one another in ascending tiers, each framed by carved tracery that spoke of great wealth and older tastes. The castle did not appear abandoned, it appeared patient. A single lantern burned near the main entrance. As Adrian stepped forward, the heavy doors swung inward without visible assistance. A current of cool air flowed past him, carrying the faint scent of old parchment and something metallic yet subtle. He crossed the threshold, and the doors closed with a resonance that echoed through unseen corridors. The entrance hall was enormous, vaulted ceilings arched overhead, supported by clustered columns that branched like petrified trees. Tapestries hung between them, their woven scenes dim with age but still discernible. Forests under moonlight, figures cloaked in black walking beneath silver skies, a castle silhouetted against a rising storm. Candles burned in tall candelabra along the walls, their flames steady and unnaturally bright, casting elongated shadows that shifted almost imperceptibly. "Welcome, Monsieur Laurent." The voice descended from the upper gallery before Adrian saw its owner, smooth, measured, cultivated. He looked upward and beheld a tall figure standing at the balustrade. The man's attire was formal yet archaic, dark velvet coat, high collar, gloves pale against the railing. His hair fell neatly to his shoulders, black as ink. Though distance softened detail, there was something about his stillness that unsettled more than any grotesque feature might have done. "I am Lord Cassian Viramont," the figure said, inclining his head slightly. "You have come seeking history." Adrian bowed in return, conscious of his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. "Your lordship honors me." Cassian descended the sweeping staircase with unhurried grace. His steps produced no audible sound upon the stone. Up close, his features were refined, almost sculptural, yet devoid of warmth. His eyes held a curious luminosity, not bright but reflective, as though mirroring something deeper than surface light. "You have traveled far," Cassian observed. "Castle Viramont is not easily found." "Nor easily forgotten, I suspect," Adrian replied carefully. A faint smile touched Cassian's lips, ambiguous in meaning. "Memory is a form of immortality, Monsieur Laurent, and immortality, as you well know, is the subject that truly interests you." The words lingered between them. Adrian did not deny it. He was shown to a chamber within the eastern wing, a vast room dominated by a four-poster bed draped in heavy fabric. A fireplace crackled softly despite the mild air outside. Tall windows framed the mountains, now fully surrendered to night. Yet no stars were visible above the castle, only a depth of darkness that seemed closer than it should have been. Dinner was served in a grand hall lined with portraits. The faces within the frames shared a striking resemblance to Cassian Viramont, variations in attire and era, yet the same eyes, the same arch of brow, the same composed detachment. Candles illuminated the long table, though Adrian noticed that only one place was set with food. "You do not dine, my lord?" Adrian asked. "I have dined," Cassian replied softly, "in other ways." The statement was delivered without menace, yet it settled heavily in the air. Over the next several evenings, Adrian explored the castle under Cassian's subtle guidance. The library alone rivaled any he had seen in the capitals of Europe. Shelves climbed 2 stories high, filled with volumes bound in leather darkened by centuries of handling. Manuscripts lay open upon reading desks, their ink unfaded. There were records of wars long forgotten, treaties never enacted, diaries of travelers who had passed through regions no longer named. One corridor led to a gallery of mirrors. Each mirror was framed in silver tarnished to charcoal. As Adrian walked past them, he felt watched, not by his reflection, but by the absence of one. In several mirrors he stood alone. In others, the space beside him was subtly distorted, as though something occupied it without casting an image. "You notice," Cassian said quietly from behind him. Adrian turned. "Yes. Reflection," Cassian continued, "is a contract between light and matter. When one withdraws from that contract, certain privileges are surrendered." The admission was neither boast nor confession. It was simply fact. The truth revealed itself gradually, not through spectacle, but through accumulation. Adrian began to observe that Cassian appeared only after sunset and vanished before dawn. The servants he occasionally glimpsed were pale and silent, moving with mechanical precision, never meeting his gaze. The castle's clocks did not chime midnight. They remained fixed at 11, as though unwilling to acknowledge what followed. On the fourth night, Cassian invited Adrian to ascend the western tower. The climb was long and spiraling, the narrow windows revealing slivers of moonlight that painted the interior walls in silver bands. At the summit, they entered a vast chamber open to the night through arched apertures. The wind moved freely here, carrying the scent of pine and distant frost. Below, the mountains stretched like frozen waves. Above, the moon hung low and brilliant. This castle, Cassian said, was built not merely as a fortress, but as a sanctuary. The House of Viramont has endured for centuries because we adapted. We withdrew when necessary. We learned restraint. Restraint? Adrian echoed. Cassian's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. The legends exaggerate our appetites. Fear is a useful embellishment, but survival requires subtlety. We do not conquer, we endure. And you invited me here. Why? Cassian turned at last, and for a fleeting instant, something ancient flickered in his expression. Weariness, perhaps, or longing. Because history fades, he said, and when it does, so do we. The world changes. It forgets the old covenants. I require a chronicler, someone who will record what we are, not as monsters in torchlight tales, but as beings bound to shadow by necessity rather than cruelty. Adrian felt the enormity of the proposition. To write such a history would mean acknowledging its truth. "And what would you require in return?" he asked quietly. Cassian stepped closer, his presence cool but not threatening. "Only discretion. And time." Days passed in an altered rhythm. Adrian slept by day and wrote by night, documenting conversations, architectural details, genealogies stretching back to eras half-legendary. He described the castle's subterranean halls, vast chambers carved directly from the mountain, lined with stone coffers not as tombs, but as places of restorative slumber. He recorded the grand ballroom whose chandeliers remained unlit for centuries, awaiting gatherings that might never occur again. He noted the observatory where ancient telescopes pointed not at stars, but at the thin line where darkness met dawn. Gradually, he understood that Castle Viramont was less a prison than a threshold. Its grandeur concealed isolation. Its silence echoed with centuries of restraint. Cassian Viramont was not a predator in constant pursuit, but a sovereign of stillness, ruling over a realm suspended between eras. Yet tension lingered. One evening, as Adrian walked alone through the eastern cloister, he heard distant music, soft, almost imperceptible. Following it, he entered a chamber he had not seen before. The walls were adorned with faded frescoes depicting nocturnal processions beneath crescent moons. At the center stood a grand piano, its lid raised. The music ceased as he stepped forward. Cassian emerged from shadow. There was a time, Cassian said, when this hall hosted gatherings of like-minded houses. We are not alone in this world, though we are few. But the centuries have thinned our kind. You fear extinction, Adrian said. I fear irrelevance, Cassian corrected gently. Outside, a faint paling touched the horizon. Cassian's expression shifted, becoming distant. Dawn approaches. You must return to your chamber. As Adrian descended the corridor, he realized that his presence here had altered more than his research. He no longer viewed the castle as a subject of study, but as a living archive. And Cassian, for all his restraint and composure, bore the solitude of centuries like an invisible crown. On his final night, Adrian stood once more upon the western tower. The moon shone with crystalline clarity. Cassian joined him, silent as mist. "Will you remain?" Cassian asked. Adrian considered the mountains below, the world beyond them, bright, hurried, forgetful. "I will write," he answered, "and I will return." Cassian inclined his head. "Then Castle Viramont will endure in more than stone." As dawn crept across the peaks, Adrian descended the winding road away from the castle. When he looked back, the towers were already dissolving into mist, indistinguishable from mountain and cloud. Yet he knew it remained, high above the world in halls of vaulted shadow and silver silence. The house of Viramont endured, neither fully of the living nor entirely apart from them, waiting with infinite patience for night to fall again. And in the quiet chambers of that grand and ancient castle, beneath ceilings that had witnessed centuries pass like fleeting breaths, eyes opened with the setting sun, luminous and eternal, keeping vigil over a world that would never fully understand the darkness watching it.